It's just a movie.
Maybe it is. You know what? To most people, Star Wars is just a movie, right? Not to us.
It's easy to become cynical when you're a fan, because your love for something will eventually evolve into projection. This feeling that whatever comes next doesn't just need to be good, it needs to matter. For fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender, that shift happened a long time ago. A story that was at once both incredibly personal while also being so communal. Being a fan of The Last Airbender felt more like being a part of a scene than just someone who dug a children's TV show, which makes what happened this year so incredibly strange. It's why one security breach not only sparked a debate about internet piracy, but also how companies seem to be sharpening their own guillotine blade.
In an open letter published today, more than 1,000 people said that they agreed that they would use every tool available to try to block the merger.
Avatar: The Last Airbender was that rare animated series that thread the needle between children and adult audiences. The three-series television show that first aired on Nickelodeon followed 12-year-old Aang as he and his friends tried to stop a world war and defeat the evil Lord Ozai. While that might sound like your typical setup for a cartoon, The Last Airbender touched on themes of genocide, imperialism, and totalitarianism, all while never speaking down to or holding the audience's hand. Ever since the show came to an end back in 2008, there's been this lingering sense that even though the story's technically wrapped up, the world itself didn't. The finale gave us closure, but it also left behind a universe that felt way too rich to just sit there untouched. Fans didn't just want more Avatar content, they wanted something that felt like a real continuation, something that respected what came before and actually built on it. And Hollywood has been circling that idea for years without ever really landing it.
Mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
Now, forget that! That's the past! Shut it off, Julie!
There was M. Night Shyamalan's live-action movie that's somehow both insulting to fandom and a death knell for the director's golden age.
It's time for you to stop doing this!
Avatar had prequel novels and comics that, depending on who you ask, ranged from solid to completely unnecessary. But none of it quite captured that feeling of, this is what we've been waiting for. Then, in 2021, Avatar Studios was announced.
Nickelodeon was under new leadership, and they were like, hey, we really love and respect Avatar, and we would love to have you guys come back.
A studio dedicated to keeping the story and world alive. Their first project was set to be a full-length feature film directed by Lauren Montgomery, rumored to be centered on Aang and the original characters, and it seemed like this was going to be a direct extension of the original animated story. This was the moment fans had been waiting years for.
Let's do this.
It was everything a studio could hope for. There was cultural relevance, nostalgia, and maybe most importantly, an established and hungry fan base. By every metric, this was a home run for both the fans and studio. But instead of being treated like a major theatrical event, the kind of release that brings people together and fills theaters to create a unique shared experience, it was quietly routed into the streaming pipeline, set to be a direct Paramount Plus release, with a thumbnail jammed between The Amazing Race and Star Trek Section 31.
What?
There didn't seem to be a real sense of urgency, no big "this is a must-see in theaters" push, just another tile to add to a content library.
Make sure the Avatar and his friends never see daylight again.
And then, before most people even had a chance to process the decision, the film leaked online. A hacked version of something that should have been a huge moment for fans across the world was suddenly just out there for free. On the surface, it's easy to write that off as just another piracy story. We've seen this happen before, especially in an era where everything is digital and distribution is more vulnerable than ever. But if you look at it that way, you're kind of missing what makes this situation interesting, because the leak itself isn't really the story, it's what the leak represents. This moment is a symptom of a much bigger shift in how Hollywood is treating its own projects, and how that, in turn, is changing the way audiences respond to them. To really understand that concept, we have to go back a few years, to when the industry made one of the most dramatic pivots in its history.
We need to talk to you.
They're here to overthrow you.
No, we're on your side. We're here to help.
When the pandemic hit in 2020, studios didn't have much of a choice on how to move forward. Theaters shut down almost overnight, and suddenly, the entire traditional model for releasing movies just disappeared. Streaming platforms became the only real option, and for a while, that made perfect sense. It was a way to keep things moving, to get projects in front of audiences, to justify massive production budgets when box office revenue wasn't even on the table. Though at that point, streaming wasn't replacing theaters. It was just filling a gap until Nicole Kidman could stomp her heels through a puddle and remind us what movies mean.
Somehow, heartbreak feels good in a place like this.
But eventually, theaters started to reopen. Not instantly and not without some hesitation, but by the time certain films were ready for release, audiences were already returning to cinemas. The appetite for theatrical experiences hadn't vanished. If anything, there was a sense that people missed it. But still, studios didn't fully pivot back. Instead, they doubled down on streaming. Movies that would have been guaranteed theatrical releases just a few years earlier were suddenly debuting exclusively on streaming platforms. A project like Prey is a pretty pitch-perfect example. A sequel to one of the most recognizable franchises of all time and directed by someone with a history of successful releases. This is a movie that should have a prim and proper theatrical release. Instead, the movie was pushed onto Hulu one day like a new episode of The Bear. However, the reception was great. Really, the biggest criticism floating around was why did this go straight to streaming and not theaters? Because of Prey's streaming success, Trachtenberg directed an in-universe animated anthology as well as a bona fide theatrical release for the sequel, Predator: Badlands. Much of that was due to the community's embracing of Prey and wondering why it got shuffled onto streaming to begin with. Because for Prey's initial release, the movie didn't become the sort of group outing a franchise like Predator deserves. There was no opening weekend buzz, no sense that this is the movie everyone is talking about right now. There was really no collective experience of seeing it at all because we were all stuck at home. And that's kind of the key difference.
This is as far as you go. No more. This is it.
In theaters, success is tangible. We understand box office success. We know Titanic was huge and that Sinners and Weapons reminded us why horror does so well in theaters. On streaming, success is a lot harder to define. Studios can talk about viewership, engagement, or subscriber growth, but these metrics aren't public and they don't create the same kind of cultural moment. A lot of that might even come down to something as simple as there are no lines. When you walked into a theater in 1999 and saw the lines for The Blair Witch Project or The Matrix, you could nod at someone knowing you were about to see something perfect. Now, you're just scrolling along until you click a button. Everything just kind of blends together. And over time, that starts to change how people think about the movies themselves. Because when something's always available, it stops feeling like something you need to prioritize. It becomes one option among hundreds. There's no pressure, no time sensitivity, no real consequence to waiting. And that shift in perception is where things start to get complicated.
Our goal is the endless scroll. By the time you reach the bottom of our menu, there's new shows at the top, and thus the singularity will be achieved.
Because studios, in trying to make things more accessible and reduce risk, ended up creating an environment where their own projects feel less important. Not because the movies themselves are worse, but because the way they're presented makes them feel smaller. If something isn't framed as an event, people don't treat it like one, and they don't feel like they're missing out if they skip it. It just becomes part of the background. And in that kind of environment, the idea of piracy starts to shift a little. It's not that people suddenly think it's okay, but the stakes feel different. If a movie was supposed to be this big theatrical experience, something that you were meant to go out and pay to see, then pirating it makes it feel like you're bypassing something significant.
Downloading films is stealing. If you do it, you will face the consequences.
Man, these anti-piracy ads are getting really mean.
Which brings us back to Avatar. This is a franchise with a massive dedicated fan base. Continuing the original story is something people have been waiting to see handled correctly for years. If there was ever a project that could justify a big theatrical push, this was it. It is so incredibly easy to vividly picture that line on opening night. Aging millennials who grew up with the show bringing their kids along. And it's the kind of shared moment you just can't replicate at home. That's the kind of release that doesn't just make money, it creates a moment. And instead, it was treated like something that could just be dumped into a streaming library.
The Avatar is no more!
It's not hard to see why studios make these decisions. Streaming feels safer. The film studios have continued to make money since the pandemic and can now revel in the flexibility of how success is defined. Netflix can shout all at once that Red One was a massive success because a theatrical release is very public. You either show up at the box office or you don't. Only Netflix is privy to how many people actually watches their content. Streaming gives studios more control over the narrative while theaters clearly suffer. But in playing it safe, they also limit the upside, because you don't get cultural events from safe. quiet releases. You get them from big, visible, shared experiences that people feel like they need to be a part of. And every once in a while, the industry gets a reminder of that. Netflix, for example, has run into this issue just recently. When K-pop Demon Hunters started gaining real traction, something interesting happened. The demand for a theatrical release became almost inevitable. It's not enough for it just to live on the platform. People want to go see it, talk about it, experience it together. But still, studios seem hesitant to fully lean into that. Instead, they tend to reserve theatrical releases for projects that feel completely safe, massive franchises like Jurassic World or guaranteed hits like James Cameron's Avatar. To them, these things feel almost impossible to fail.
Wait a minute! Maybe that will work! Yes! It's genius! Everybody take 5!
When a movie gets a wide theatrical release, it comes with an implicit message. This is worth your time, money, and attention. It's something you should go out of your way to experience. Streaming doesn't send that same message. It puts everything on the same level, where even the biggest projects are just one option among many. Nothing really stands out. So when a movie like Avatar gets pushed into that environment, it loses something before audiences even press play. It loses that sense of urgency, that feeling that this is happening right now and you need to be a part of it. Because when that feeling disappears, people act accordingly. They forget or they look for other ways to watch it, including, in some cases, leaked copies. Suddenly, piracy feels less like a big deal and more like a convenience. That's the real problem. And it's one that Hollywood doesn't seem to fully acknowledge, even as it keeps asking why theaters are struggling while also ignoring them. So the bigger question isn't just about this one movie, it's about what happens next. Because now it's not just about where movies are released, it's about whether people feel like they matter at all. The Avatar leak didn't create that problem, it just made it impossible to ignore. So, what do you think? What streaming movies do you think deserved a full theatrical release? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.